Hello, everyone. Just a brief word. I hope you are seeing my screen. We take this out. So I just want to introduce our platform, Plataforma Ensino Ativo. You can see the link here. And this is a platform where we try to, it's mostly devoted to the Portuguese talking people, although there is some contents in English. But it's supposed to put some contents together and help us in some aspects for changing the way that we see how we teach, and hopefully it will help everyone. And a very strong component also is the forum. So let's try to interact with each other and share our experiences. So without further ado, I will introduce Professor Robert Talbert. Let me take this out. So we will be giving us a seminar on flipped learning. He's a professor in the mathematics department at Grand Valley State University in Allendale, Michigan, USA. And he's also the author of the book, Flipped Learning, A Guide for Higher Education Faculty. I think that if you did your homework, you are as eager as I am for hearing Robert. So I will pass the word to him. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Alexandra, and good afternoon to you. Good morning to me. It's 8:30 in the morning here in Michigan, and I messed up the time zones, of course, and showed up at 7:30 in the morning, but that's okay. I got a little bit of work done for you here. I'm really, really grateful to be with you today, and I'm thankful for Alexandra and Sophia and Carlos and all the others who have put this together and invited me to come be with you today. My only regret is that I am not actually with you in Portugal today. This pandemic it's created a lot of opportunities for me to connect with audiences I wouldn't necessarily be able to, but I would really, really love to come visit your country one of these days. It's one of those I've always wanted to get over to, but never have quite made it yet. So I'm glad you're here, and I know that this is going to be a very active and productive session this morning. There were 42 registrants for this session, and 40 of you, as of an hour ago, had completed the pre-session activity. So that is by far the highest percentage of completion I have ever had in a faculty workshop. So you're already working hard, and we're going to continue that today. So again, it's really great to be with you. I know there are some major challenges that are facing you at your university in the future, but I want to encourage you that you're moving in the right direction, and by going in this direction, you're becoming part of the solution to what is ailing higher education across the world, and you're doing the right things. The question is just how to make this work for us, and how to really make our classes work better for our students, and that's what today is going to really be all about. Before we begin, I want to just explain a few technical things about how the session today is going to work. First of all, I'm going to mute everyone so that we don't have any unwanted noises, dogs or children in the background. I have a 17-year-old daughter who sleeps most of the day, but she's upstairs, and I'm going to make sure she doesn't create a lot of noise either. This is going to be a very active 90 minutes, very little talking from me outside of this intro today, and a lot of activity from you. So here are a few things to know. First of all, I'm going to put a link in the chat to a document, and here comes the link. Here it is. And this is a resource handout for you, and it contains links to all, it has my contact information in it, links to all the tools and images and more that we're going to use in the session today. And if we come up with more things to share, I'll be adding to that document as we go. So go ahead and open that up in a separate browser tab and just keep it handy. I'll refer back to it a lot through the session today. Secondly, I'm using a tool here. Let's see, let me get this shared. I'm using a tool today called Mentimeter. And this is going to both display slides and also allow you to interact with some polling here. What you'll need to do, and let me go grab my chat screen again here, is go to www.menti.com. There's the link, or the link. I'll make that into a clickable link here for you. www.menti.com. So you can interact with these slides in one of two ways. You can just watch these slides on your Zoom screen, or if you go to menti.com and type in, it's going to ask you for a code. That code is 5964. You can see it at the top there, 6749. And so if you enter that code, when you go to menti.com, you'll get an interactive version of these slides. So I'm going to be referring to the Zoom window, which is what you're looking at right now, and also the Mentimeter window, which is where you're going to interact with the slides. I'm going to have some polling activities for you and some other things to do. If you have a question, then at any time, this is a little hard to see here, but you'll see it better on other slides here. At any time, there's an icon in the lower right of the Menti screen where you can click this icon and you can ask a question. I can't ask myself questions, but you can ask a question at any time. This will put your question into a queue, and I'll get to all of those questions at the end of the session today. I've carved out 15, 20 minutes at the end for answering questions. Please use that feature in Mentimeter to ask questions. The chat over on your Zoom is going to be a space just for you. Okay, this is for you to talk with each other, to do a little back channel discussion. I'll be sharing links to it. Please use that freely. However, I will probably not be monitoring it very closely. That's for you. I think Sophia will be looking at this, and if there's anything important that seems to be arising, that's the place to do it. And if you have any technical questions about a website's not working or so on, or if I muted myself and forgot to unmute, leave that question over in the chat. So I prefer you use Mentimeter for substantive questions about the content of today's session. And if you ask a question in the chat, that's fine, but it's going to be hard for me to pay attention to all the things that are happening on my screen. Okay, so just to test how Mentimeter is working, I would like for you to, here's just a recap of what I just said here. I would like for you to play around with this for a second. On your Mentimeter screen, if you're looking at this on Zoom, you can't interact, but on your Mentimeter screen, which can be pulled up in a separate browser tab, or you can use your phone. I have a few questions for you, and you should see these three statements here with sliders. And I would like for you to, if people are already doing it, just simply slide the slider left to right to tell me how much you agree or disagree with the statements that you're doing here. I'm taking a risk there with the Real Madrid question. I don't know how you all feel about Real Madrid. I guess I'm about to find out. So just take a couple of minutes to try this out and make sure that you're able to interact with the Mentimeter screen. It looks like people are. I've got 27, 30. Okay, looks like that seems to be working pretty well. I have a question that's been asked. You can see the little text bubble here as you're asking these things. What I get in the questions is I can click on that button at any time and it pops up the question. Okay, and you should be able to see that too. And that's a question that I saw in the pre-session about case studies. We'll talk about that. Okay, so it looks like Real Madrid is not necessarily well thought of in Portugal. I probably could have figured that out beforehand. We don't get a lot of La Liga here in the United States. It's not televised, unfortunately. So the United States is still a developing country in terms of football. All right, so thank you for that. Looks like you're able to interact with Mentimeter, and we'll come back to this, especially in just a few minutes. Okay, and I've got my eye on the chat screen over here, and before I get going, I'm going to get the participant list up as well. All right, so thanks. As I said, this is going to be a very active day today. You've been put in a position where you're going to be making major changes to the way that you teach. And again, just want to encourage you, these are all good changes that you're being asked to make. It may not be the ideal situation, and that's a lot of change. And I imagine a lot of you are feeling overwhelmed and possibly burned out by what's been happening, much less the fact that we're on the tail end of a global pandemic that's changed everything. So that's why I have flipped this session. Okay, we only have 90 minutes in which to work. It's going to go by very, very quickly. And so we flipped the session. I've had you do a lot of things before the session, and thank you for doing that. And this is also modeling the flipped learning concept. Okay, you got your first contact with the basic material before the session. Now we're going to pick up where that leaves off. So with so much to do in so little time, I've decided to focus our work today on the simplest and most basic parts of the process of teaching with flipped learning. And those steps are what you see in this flow chart. Okay, what we're going to do today is talk about and especially practice this flow here, which is the 80% or 20% of things you do to prepare a flipped lesson that will cause about 80% of the results here. You're going to be working in groups to select a lesson you would like to work with, write learning objectives for it that are clear and measurable, categorize them with Bloom's taxonomy, and then in the end, we'll think about, although not necessarily fully plan out, active learning tasks, both for in-class activities and for pre-class activities. That's the core of how you make flipped learning work for you and for your students. And so it's very, very important that we get some practice with this today. So again, this is not the entire process of teaching with flipped learning. It's the basic core of instructor activities. If you can get comfortable with this over the next 90 minutes, then you can practice it some more later, and eventually you're going to be experts at this. So I'd like to begin here with a little bit of review here. I'm going to have you, I'm going to put you into, if I can get my slide to advance here, I'm going to put you into random breakout rooms of about 3 or 4 people. And I'm going to give you this link here. Please go ahead and open this up because you won't be able to access this once you're in your breakout room. What you have here is a blank copy of part of the pre-session activities, okay? What I'm going to have you do is go ahead and open that link up, and you'll have, it looks like a copy of what you did for pre-session, but it's actually a little different. I'm going to have you work through this in groups over the next 10 minutes. It's going to go by very, very quickly, just 10 minutes, and work through this in groups, working together to complete a blank copy of a portion of the pre-session activities, okay? So again, go ahead and open this link in a separate browser tab and have it open in front of you. And at this point, I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, and I'm going to give you 10 minutes to go through as much of this as you possibly can, and then we're going to come back and take it from there. Okay, so again, please go ahead and open that link up. You won't be able to access it once you're in the breakout rooms.
Robert, sorry to interrupt. Yes, it's not editable, right?
It should be editable, yes. It's just a, oh wait, you know what? I think actually I gave you the wrong, I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong link. I gave you the link to the form itself. Don't edit that. Do this instead.
Okay, thank you.
I do that all the time. That's the actual form. This is that one, that second one. Please ignore that first link. That second one is the actual form. That should open up correctly. Sorry about that.
It's good. It's good. Thank you.
I wish they paid me like every time I send out the form instead of the editable thing. So go ahead and open that second form up, and I'm going to put you into your breakout rooms in just a moment. And then go ahead and jump in. And this is going to go by again very quickly so we don't run out of time for the good stuff later on. Okay. And let's see. I'm going to put you into groups of, I'd like to get about 3 to 4. So there's going to be about 14 rooms, okay? 10 minutes, right here, off you go. Okay, I apologize for giving you 90 seconds and then immediately closing the rooms out. Normally the preset for that close the rooms out is 2 minutes, but I guess it's been changed to 30 seconds. I think I did that myself. Well, maybe we have enough to go with here. I'm going to give it just a moment because sometimes it takes a few seconds for people to pop back into the main room, even once the rooms are closed. Okay, I think we're all back now. So thanks for your work in just kind of briefly going through that blank copy. By the way, this is a good, if you're thinking about what to do in a flipped classroom setting, this is not a bad option. You give students a pre-class activity to do before class, and then your first 5 minutes of class is to get them in groups together and everybody work through a blank copy or a very shortened version of the pre-class activity. The students who did the work can really feel good about themselves, and students who might be lagging behind a little bit learn a few things. So I'm going to direct your attention now to the Mentimeter screen, which should be open. You can watch it on your Zoom screen, but you're going to need to participate with this in your separate browser tab where you've opened. Again, it's www.menti.com, and you're using the code 59646749. I've got a few polling questions to ask you about what you've learned here. Polling questions for me are an absolute gift to teaching, especially online teaching. It's a really great way to kick off a flipped lesson or do some deeper conceptual work. And this especially works well with large classes. A number of you were asking about flipped learning in large classes. Polling activities are great for large classes. In fact, the larger the classes, the better the activity. So questions for you. First of all, and this is going to put some things on your screen here. Which of the following are parts of the definition of active learning? You should be able to select up to all four of these. But on your screen, go ahead and select and hit submit when you are ready to vote. I'm going to give you about 1 minute to do that. And then we'll reveal the correct answer and see how we did. 1 minute or until we get to around 40, 42 people, which we seem to have already done here at 40. So I will just ask you to complete this in maybe 5 seconds. 4, 3, oops, excuse me. Okay, Google, stop. Got my Google Home timing me out here. 3, 2, 1, and let's stop. Yeah, so I agree with you on this one. I think your 2 correct ones here are showing up. Most people are voting for it. Active learning involves 2 things. Getting students involved in activities. And in the videos, I kind of went into some depth about that word involve. It's in English, that's a pretty loaded term. It means the students are actually an integral part of the activity. It's not just mindless activity, it gets them mixed into it. And then having students think about what they're doing is important too. At some point, we want students not just to be engaged in activities, but in sort of putting their activities together with what they learn, being mindful about their learning. So good job on that. I think you know what active learning is. That's good. If you're ever wondering, well, is this about an activity you have planned? Like, is this an active learning exercise? That's the filter to think about it with. Okay, question number 2. This is a little bit of a different, sort of a variation of a question that was asked on the pre-class activities. True or false, having students watch videos before class is an essential part of a flipped learning lesson. Okay, so select true or false, and we'll see how the little ring here plays out. And don't be biased. I mean, if you really think that it's true, don't get intimidated by that large pink section of the ring there. I mean, those 88% people could be wrong. It's happened before, right? I live in America. A majority of us are wrong most of the time about most things. But all that aside, I'm not going to get into that. All right, so give it 5 more seconds here. What do you think? True or false? Watching videos before class is an essential part of a flipped learning lesson. 3, 2, 1, and stop. Okay, I'm going to say this is definitely a false statement. Okay, watching videos before class is a common part of a flipped learning lesson. I mean, you did it for this session. You watched some videos, but it's not necessarily an essential thing to do. And I bring this up because if you're intimidated by flipped learning, or you're just kind of worried about it, like it's going to take so much time because I've got to create all these videos. And believe me, creating videos takes a really long time. Even if you have a streamlined workflow and you're experienced with it and you know your tools and that sort of thing, it still takes a lot of time, usually about a 6-to-1 ratio of time spent making a video versus the length of the result. It's not necessary, okay? And in fact, I wanted to, in the resource handout, I want to just highlight a specific link that I just added a few moments ago, and I'll copy that link and drop it in the chat here. And this is to one of my colleagues, not at Grand Valley, but in the United States, Lorena Barba, who's a professor of engineering at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And she's a flipped learning proponent as well. And she has created, this is a link to an article or a resource page for a class she teaches on numerical methods in Python. So it's an engineering course. It's kind of an applied math course. It's flipped and it has exactly 1 video in it. The rest of it, what students do before class is not watch videos. It's doing a little bit of reading and a little bit of coding to get themselves up to speed with more advanced coding exercises that take place during class. There's very, very little video involved with it. There's some good research emerging too that suggests that watching video before class as part of a flipped learning activity is actually possibly one of the worst things that students can do, because we want students to be active at all times. And watching a video is not necessarily an active learning exercise. So you don't have to give videos before class. Absolutely not. You could have students to simply do some reading with some of these social annotation tools like Perusall. Somebody mentioned that. I'll drop this. I'll put the link in the resource page here. It's a way of reading a textbook, and you can comment on it, and other people can comment on your comments, and it's automatically graded using an AI system. It's a very impressive piece of software. You could have students do demos. You could have students do little at-home experiments, anything that gets students contact with initial ideas before class. It doesn't have to be a video. And you can discuss some of that more a little bit later on. I just want to emphasize videos are optional. If you don't like making videos or it's too much time, don't do it. Next question for you. Get advanced here. Okay, so here are some learning objectives for a calculus class in a lesson on the chain rule. Okay, these will show up much better on your Mentimeter screen than on the Zoom screen here. Which of these would you consider to be clear and measurable? Again, I have no way of hiding the results here, unfortunately, so you're going to see people voting, but you see a ton of people voting for those three. That doesn't mean those three are the only options or even correct options. Okay. So take a minute, or about a minute, sure, and which ones are clear and measurable in your estimation? Meanwhile, I'm going to put some links in the resource document while you do that. Someone just told me I can hide the results. I need to learn my tools a little bit better. Well, I'm definitely going to use that. See, I come to these things to learn. I am putting, if you're interested in Perusall, there's a link, and that's going on the resource page right now. But take just another moment to finish up what you're doing here. And let's count it down, 3, 2, 1, and stop. Can I lock the voting too? Yeah, close voting. There we go. Wow. Amazing. Okay, so the correct answer, so yeah, I think those three are the clear and measurable ones. And I want to just mention this too, in the resource document this morning, because I accidentally showed up an hour early for this because I got the time zones wrong. I had time to make a video debrief of the pre-session activities. You'll find a link to that. I'll drop it in the chat, but you'll also find it in the resource document. And this one I talked about specifically, and you can read it for yourself, but the ones I want to point out here are the ones that I didn't mark correct. Know how to use the chain rule and understand the need for the chain rule. The reason those aren't clear or measurable is because how would I know whether a student knows how to use the chain rule or understands the need for the chain rule? It's important that we understand the need for the chain rule, sure, but how would I measure that? I mean, I can't put some sort of contraption on the student's head to see if they understand. I have to ask them to do something, like explain why the chain rule is important, for example. Now, that's a clear and measurable activity. I can just say, could you please explain to me why the chain rule is important? I could listen to you or read your writing, and from there decide whether you really understand it. But just saying understand, how do I know? Okay, the answer to that question, how would I know if a person understands the chain rule? The answer to that question is the real learning objective. Okay, so those other three, though, state the chain rule, explain the purpose of the chain rule, write out the functions in a composition. Those are all concrete activities that I can see students do and assess them somehow. And that's what makes them clear and measurable. Okay, next question for you. This one, the next three questions, these are not from the pre-session activities. Okay, I want to these are new questions that you haven't seen before. I'm a mathematician and an algebraist, and so I'm drawing from what I know. And I apologize if you don't know abstract algebra. You don't have to know any abstract algebra to answer these questions. So hide the results here. In an abstract algebra class, students are asked to state the definition of this concept called a ring. So state the definition of a ring. In Bloom's taxonomy, how would you categorize that? Which level of Bloom's taxonomy would that belong to? So thank you, Sophia, for cluing me into that feature of Mentimeter, which I think I might have known was there. We have 28 voting. Let's go ahead and take a minute to vote in on that. 60 seconds, and then we'll unveil the results and see how we did. Okay, we're getting up to, we still have, how many? We have 56 of you present. And once we get to around 45, I'm just gonna say we're basically done. Go ahead and vote in what you think. And I'll give you 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1, and let's close that out. Oh, look, there's a countdown button too. All right, so you said, a lot of you said remember, and I would agree with that. Okay, I would definitely say this is a remembering task. It's something, it's a task, it's at the very bottom level of Bloom's taxonomy. In the resource document, I include a sort of a large high-res version of that, of the pyramid of Bloom's taxonomy that you saw in the videos, and I'll link to it if you want to use it yourself. Remembering tasks are tasks that involve defining, listing, memorizing, repeating, stating things, just pulling something out of memory. It's a very important level of cognition and activity that students should do. We should probably do more of it, but it's very, and this is exactly what this task is. I'd say, tell me what the definition of a ring is. There's nothing further, so that's a remembering task. Okay. Next question, same class. Students are asked to give an example of a ring and an example of something that isn't a ring. Again, you don't need to know what a ring is, but if you're asked to give an example of something and give an example of the opposite of something, what kind of task is that? Okay, same kind of question. Categorize that with Bloom's taxonomy, if you would. So voting should be open. Okay, now it's open. What do you think? What level of Bloom's taxonomy is that? It's a confusing little icon there. I can get the countdown started here. There we go. So this will auto close in 1 minute. Or we're already up to 45 votes on this, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and close it out myself. 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1, and stop. Okay, most people said this is an understanding question, and I would agree with that. This is a question, although there's less agreement amongst us here, as you can see, a lot of folks said applying. I could absolutely see where this might be an applying, you might think this is an applying question, and maybe for your, if you're teaching abstract algebra, maybe in your context, this is an application. But I would say this is an understanding question for me, but I actually mark them both correct because I think that you could make a case for either one. This is a classifying question. It's an identifying, it's something to say, I know what the definition is, and now I'm going to put it into practice, but not necessarily, you could call that applying. It's a little less than a mathematical application of a concept. So I could see where both could be correct, and so I marked them both correct. I would call that an understanding question because it involves classifying things. This is a ring, that's not a ring. Okay, but you could disagree with me on that, and we could both be right. Okay, I don't think it's any higher up Bloom's taxonomy, though. I would say that. Okay, I think this is the last question here. Also in an abstract algebra, no, there's 2 more. Okay, in an abstract algebra class, students are asked to experiment with some examples of rings and try to form a conjecture about how they behave. Okay, so experiment with rings and form a conjecture about their behavior. Okay, what kind of activity is that? Okay, take a minute to think about that and vote in. While you're thinking, let me just motivate the purpose behind these questions. Coming up with learning objectives is a difficult task, but once we've done it, we have to think in a flipped learning environment about where and when are students going to encounter these learning objectives. Okay, how am I going to focus the pre-class time, and how am I going to focus the in-class time? This kind of question is key for understanding the answer to that bigger question of what should I be doing with the time that I have? Now that a lot of you are going to have exactly 50% of that time real soon. This is a major question. Okay, we can't do everything in the 1/2 of the time we have now. So what do we do? Okay, 9 seconds. We'll just let this tick down and then we'll see what you said. Experiment with some examples of rings and form a conjecture about their behavior. Voting is closed, and you said, a lot of you said, majority here says analyze, and I think that's what I said too. Although I could see this also involves some elements of application. Okay, I call this an analyzing task because analyzing tasks are all about, that's the 4th level of Bloom's taxonomy. It's in that little green middle section of Bloom's taxonomy. They're all about taking things apart and seeing how they work, like comparing, contrasting, experimenting with things. Okay, and that's what this task really is. All right. So I would call that an analyzing task, but there's certainly a lot of application that takes place. And so I could see where you might say this is an applying task. However, I just want to say that you're both of these two large answers here are basically the same in terms of how you plan your class out. Okay, and we'll come back to that in just a second. The idea that from the pre-session that you learned is that class time in flipped lessons are focused on those 2 tasks, application and analysis. That's the primary focus of your class meeting time, because that's the hardest part of the hardest material in some ways. Okay, so whether you call it application or analysis, it's still going to be done in class, and that's really, in some sense, all that really matters. I think I had one more question here. This is kind of a different sort of question. And it gets at this last thing I just said. In a flipped environment, here are the 3 learning objectives, and I added a new one on here, prove the conjecture that you formed. Okay, so here are the 3 learning objectives that you looked at and a new one. So which of these should be done before class and which one should be done either during or after class? There's a slider here, just kind of for each one, slide it. There's only 2 options here, before or during and after. So take a minute to determine which ones of these should be done in class and which one should be done before class. There's no scientifically proven right answer to these questions, by the way. These are all professional judgment calls. You as the instructor play an enormously important role in flipped learning. And I don't want you to ever forget that. Okay, this is not something that we just factored where we're going to replace the instructor with videos. That's a common concern with flipped learning. You are playing maybe more of an important role than you have ever played in teaching your classes, because you determine where things go. Okay, and you and I could disagree on the answers we're about to see here, and we could both be right. Okay, it depends on your students, it depends on your material, it depends on a lot of things. Okay, 10 seconds left. Where should these different learning objectives be treated before? What should be before class? What should be either during or after class? Okay, and here's what the results say. I would agree with all of these. Okay. Yeah, I can't even mark a correct answer on this on Mentimeter. Stating the definition of a ring. I mean, obviously we want students to be able to do that anytime, anywhere, but this is something that I would like students to encounter before class. I do not want to waste class time, which is now a lot more scarce than it used to be, by writing the definition of a ring on the chalkboard. I mean, that's a complete waste of time. I'm just going to give students a video or a text and have them read it, and maybe in the pre-session activity, type it out, okay, just to get the encounter with it. Giving an example of a ring, that's probably something I would like students to do before class, although during it, class is also a good time to do it as well. Like that would be on my pre-session activity. Reading through the textbook, state an example of a structure that is a ring, state an example of a structure that is not a ring, and give a little explanation why. That would be something that students can, and I would argue should be able to do simply by watching a video or reading a textbook. Those other 2 are much higher up the Bloom's taxonomy, aren't they? I mean, you can feel it. They're much, even if you don't know any abstract algebra, experimenting and proving things, while those are not basic. Okay? Those are very complicated tasks. And so we don't want to leave students to encounter them for the first time when they're on their own. We want them to do this when they have help involved and can work with each other. So experimenting with rings to form a conjecture, I totally agree. That's something I would probably focus my entire class time on doing. Okay, that would be a great 50-minute group activity. And then proving the conjecture that we formed, maybe we can get a start on that during class. Maybe that's something best left to complete after class when there's less time pressure. Okay. So, right. So I would totally agree with you. So now we're getting a feel for how to plan a flipped lesson, aren't we? It involves forming clear and measurable learning objectives, filtering them through Bloom's taxonomy, and thinking about how to get students working with the lower third of Bloom's taxonomy before class and the middle third during class, and maybe the upper third following class. Okay. So we are now going to, that's a great activity. Thank you for your work on this. We're going to move now into our main activity for the day, which seems like everything's flying by very quickly, or I told you it would. So here's what's going to happen next. And that you've had this experience here, we got to get some practice in writing learning objectives too. Okay, we're going to switch tools for this. And this is in the resource page. I will put this on the in the chat as well, as always. Let's see, here it is. So this is using an online whiteboard tool called a Jamboard. It's like a Google Doc, but it's a whiteboard. It's an online whiteboard. You may or may not have ever heard of Jamboard. It's not something that Google makes a lot of publicity about, although they should, because it's a really nice tool. There's a link to it in the chat. Please go ahead and open this up in a browser tab. Works best in a browser, I think. This is, again, it's a Google product, like a Google Doc, except it's a whiteboard. I'm going to show you an example of how to use this first, okay? Let me pull this down to my Zoom screen here so you can see a lot of you are playing around with this already. That's great. Okay, so on this whiteboard, what I'm going to have you do here, and this one, don't move this stuff around, okay? Everybody stop messing around with that first one here. You're going to get your own here in just a minute. Thanks. I love the energy. I love go ahead and start moving things around.
Robert, sorry for interrupting you again. Is there a limit on users?
I do not believe there is. There's a limit on the number of boards, though, so we might bump up against a limitation here.
I'm getting this note. There are currently too many people viewing this file. Please try again later.
Okay, well, we'll do what we can with what we got.
Okay, here. I will see with your screen. No problem.
This is maybe one of the reasons that Google doesn't push this too hard, because there's some serious limitations on this. We'll improvise for this, but if those of you who can access this, here's what I'd like you to do. I mean, even if you can't get on the whiteboard, you can do this maybe separately in breakout rooms. I'm going to put you into breakout rooms in a minute, and you can see the instructions. I want you to, in your groups, choose a lesson that you might teach. Now, your groups might be heterogeneous. You might be in a group with some people who are not in your discipline. If that's the case, everyone decide on a lesson that you like to work with. And if it's not in your discipline, then you can play the role of instructional designer and just consult with the person whose lesson this is. Once you've chosen your lesson, I'm going to ask you to create 4 to 6 learning objectives that are clear and measurable, and put them on sticky notes, and then drag the notes to the appropriate Bloom's taxonomy level. If you're not able to access the Jamboard, maybe one person in your group can access it, and you can all work together. That would definitely keep you under the limit. As you can see, I'm doing an example right here with Riemann sums from Calculus 1, something I just got through teaching. So I have put some learning objectives on each of these little sticky notes. I'm going to create another one here just to show you how this works. If you'd like to create a sticky note, go over to the sidebar and click this icon. It says sticky note, or you can hit Control-Shift-P, click it, and it brings up a little template. And I'm going to add a learning objective that's not on the board here, which is set up a Riemann sum and calculate it with a computer. Okay. I'll click save, and that puts the sticky note on the board. Once the sticky note's created, you can click and drag it to move it, or you can resize it, or you can rotate it as such. Once you've created just a handful, not too many, 4 to 6 learning objectives for your lesson, make sure they're clear and measurable. Put them in the appropriate Bloom's taxonomy level. Like calculate a sum given in sigma notation. I think that might be an apply question. So I'm going to put that in the apply area. Explain the general process of how to compute a Riemann sum. That sounds like an understanding type of question. And so on. Determine whether this is an overestimate or underestimate. That might be analyzed. Again, different people can have different opinions about this, but that's what I'm going to want you to do in groups. Again, if you bump up against the limit, what I would suggest is one person in each group be the Jamboard master that does all the stuff on the Jamboard. That way, everybody can have a shot at this. Okay, I'm going to create. Let's see. Last time we had 14 rooms here. So I need to go over here. I have blank versions of these over here. I just need to create 13 duplicates of this very quickly here. There's 1, there's 2 total, 3. Oops, I didn't do it. 4, 5, and so on. I'm creating too many duplicates here. 6, 7, 8. I didn't know how many groups there would be before I showed up today, otherwise I would have done this. 9. A couple more will be enough. Now, to know which group goes with which, here's some instructions for you. The example board is slide number 1. Group 1, once you have gotten into here, that you're going to be on slide number 2. Group 2 is going to be on slide number 3. Group 3 is going to be on slide number 4, and so on. I hope that's clear. I don't have time to go through and label all these, so I will just leave that for you. And if nothing else, you can just find an empty space and just go with it. Okay, so I'm going to put you into groups now. And again, the instructions are pick a lesson, come up with some learning objectives for it, and put them in the right Bloom's taxonomy area. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to do this, okay? Don't spend too much time debating the learning objectives. Just try to get something that's good enough for now, okay? And let me go ahead and get you, I'm going to put you into the same rooms that you were a few minutes ago. And about 10 minutes. Rooms are closing out right now. Rooms are closing out right now. We'll get everybody back in here in just a moment here. I really encourage you to look at some of these other examples on different boards. And this Jamboard will remain up for you to kind of check out in the future as well. Let me go ahead and share the screen. I want to just touch on a few things before I share the screen. Actually, let me explain what I'm going to do. I'm going to just choose a couple of examples that I saw coming through, and I want you to be thinking about, now that we've built learning objectives for these, think about what's going to take place and when, okay? If these were actual flipped lessons, what would students be doing before class, and what would students be doing? What would be the focus of in-class and maybe post-class higher level activities? I might ask you some chat questions here in a minute and we'll have you discuss these things. Let me get to the screen sharing here. The main event is you. I did a great job on this. I saw in the registration that someone was here from the culinary arts, and I was really, really hoping that this person would be doing their lesson on the board here. I don't know if this is you, culinary arts person, but I love food examples here, and I said so. So the topic here, the lesson is vegetable cuts, and they have identified a number of learning objectives here, like the kinds of knives you use, types of cuts. This is just making me really, really hungry. I don't know. It's only 9:30 in the morning here. I shouldn't be hungry. Choosing the right kind of knife and right kind of cut for a specific vegetable, applying things here like receive a vegetable and type of cut, choose the appropriate knife and cut the vegetable. I love this progression along the top row here. This isn't arranged in the pyramid like Bloom's taxonomy normally is, but it goes this direction in terms of complexity. We start low, higher, 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 higher. And so knowing the kind, being able to state the kind of cuts and types of knives is a remembering task. Choosing a cut for a specific vegetable is understanding, and then applying it is actually, cutting the vegetable. And you can't do culinary arts without creating something, right? That's the whole point. And I love the evaluation and creation questions you have here. So this is great. I mean, if this were an actual lesson about cutting vegetables, then let me just say, first of all, doesn't it make sense to flip a lesson like this? I mean, nobody goes into culinary arts to be lectured on how to cut vegetables. You do it because you have a specific thing you need to be able to do, like actually cutting the vegetables. And that's the hard part. So I was just going to make a few annotations on here that in a flipped version of this lesson, what you want to focus on are, let me grab my pen tool here. What you'd want to focus on are the lower third of Bloom's taxonomy, these tasks right there. That's your pre-class activity right there. Once that's what makes this such a nice workflow for you that will save you a lot of time if you can identify the learning objectives and put them in the right place in terms of Bloom's taxonomy. You just made your pre-class activity. All you got to do is write it up. Okay, so if I were teaching this class, I would ask students beforehand, I'd give them some materials, print, video, observations of what's in a kitchen. I'm not sure how, I mean, there's a number of ways to do this, to learn what types of cuts there are, what kind of knives there are, what kind of cutting boards you use, and maybe give them a little bit of practice in the understanding things. Like here's a specific vegetable, like a carrot, like what kind of knife should you use and how should you cut it up if you want to accomplish this particular task. And then what do you do in class? That would be, the focus would be on these two levels, apply and analyze, okay? That's what you would probably do during your class meeting. And when you look at it, doesn't it make sense? I mean, you would be cutting things up and maybe looking at other people's work and seeing if they did it right. And that's often what happens in a culinary arts program. I think the culinary arts and vocational education have great pedagogy, great teaching going on. You could even include maybe some of these in your in-class activity. I could definitely see a class being focused on, today we're going to make a salad. Okay, and that's the class, and it involves all these things. But the yellow items are what you would have students do before class, and don't spend any class time on it. Okay, the red stuff is what you would probably focus on in the in-class portion. So all you've got to do is to simply create activities that do those actions that are on the little yellow cards. There, you just plan the lesson. Mostly. I want to move on to a couple of other, there are lots of really great ones here, but I wanted to focus on this one too, because some people were asking about medical applications to this. I want to say that the health sciences are probably at the forefront of flipped learning right now. In fact, here in the United States, there is a body that does accreditation that certifies pharmacy programs, okay, for pharmacologists. And they recently put out this document. It's a policy now that all basic pharmacology classes must involve a flipped structure. They're decreeing that all pharmacology classes must be done flipped. And it makes a lot of sense when you think about what medical people do, like a first aid class. I don't want to be lectured on how to, how to help somebody who's choking. I want to actually practice helping someone who's choking. My wife is in the medical profession as well, and she didn't learn how to do her job by listening to a lecture. She learned by practicing doing her job. And so we're going to really focus the class time on practice on difficult stuff, the more difficult things. Okay, so for example, in this first aid class, what you would focus on pre-class is this, maybe that one, those tasks there. Any sort of anatomical terminology, medical terminology that needs to be learned and memorized, do that before class. We're not going to put up PowerPoint slides that have terms on them. That's a complete waste of class time, especially now that you don't have as much of it as you used to. You got to focus it on the high impact things. Stating and memorizing emergency numbers, that's really important. Understanding, like that would be, I could definitely see some pre-class activity. What are some of the symptoms when someone's choking and what should you do about it? That would be a great thing for students to tell you before class. And if you receive student activities from their pre-class activities like we did today, and you see there are a lot of people are getting it wrong, you can pause and then make some corrections. But what you should really focus your class time on here, and I totally agree with this group, is this material right here, okay? Especially this one. It seemed to me like the best planned first aid class would be, here's a mannequin or a dummy. You know, these mannequins are incredibly sophisticated now. Tell me what the symptoms are for choking, and then practice helping a person who is choking. If not a person, then a dummy. Okay, that's a great use of class time. If you only have a small amount of class time, you've got to focus it on the most important things that students will absolutely need to practice in order to learn first aid. I lost my chat window. Just a second here. I'm going to make sure I'm catching people. Okay, got it. And boy, there's so many great ones. You did a nice job on this one. This is a good example here in this chemistry class of creating learning objectives that, excuse me, hit a range of Bloom's taxonomy levels. It's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be the case that every Bloom's taxonomy level is hit in a single class. Like this first aid class, there's nothing here, there's nothing here. That's possibly okay. I mean, I don't think that's necessary for every single lesson, but it's good if you have the opportunity to make sure your learning objectives do address a range of tasks. They're not all concentrated in basic material, nor do they leave out a lot of basic material and concentrate on the upper levels. And I like this lesson here from group 6, group 4, I can't remember, that gives us an instance of every single level through here, especially here in the create end of things. Again, pre-class would be these two things. We just ask students these questions. State the formula of sodium chloride. How many elements are in sodium chloride? One of the probably the number one question that I get, and that you asked most commonly in the what questions do you have part of the pre-session activity today, is what happens if students don't do the work? Well, my question would be, what work are you giving students to do? Okay, if you're giving them simple things to do, like state the formula of sodium chloride, tell me how many elements are in sodium chloride, then I think that students are going to do it. I don't think you're going to run into this problem. Okay, when you start asking students to do things that maybe are a little too high of a level, like this would not be a great pre-class activity to do. Verify if concentration changes if the temperature is increased. That's not a really appropriate pre-class activity. And if you ask students to do it before class, a lot of them are going to say no. So don't ask them to do it before class. Just focus on the remembering and understanding tasks. Those are simple, they're doable. You should not be doing that during your class meeting. Students should be doing that before your class meeting through structured activities. What you should be doing your class activity on is focusing on these two bits right there. Okay, calculating, verifying. You could probably include this one as well. I think that would be a fair task to include, focus in the in class. This one right here, oops, drop my pen here. This one right here, I would say, yeah, this is, hang on, there we are. That one might be better suited for after class. So it seems like that's a pretty complex activity. I could see that being an extended project or a homework assignment that students do over the course of a week or two, for instance. So the red material here is kind of what you would focus your class time on. And all you've got to do is write up an activity that has students doing the action verbs that are on these cards. Okay. It actually becomes very, very simple and very, very quick to plan a lesson out once you've identified the learning objectives and put them and know when they should be encountered. That's my point here. There's one last one I wanted to do, then we need to start wrapping up here, and that was this one. I love this example of a real world activity. I'm going to steal this example actually for future workshops because I'm always trying to find I hate doing math all the time in my examples. So I'm looking for like real world examples. The first aid one and this one and the salad making one I think I'm going to use. Changing a tire on a car, okay? Something that students should do before the class on changing a tire. I mean, I wish I had a class on changing a tire, is this stuff, okay? Tell me, like list out the steps you would do to change a tire. That's something that I think that you have every right to ask students to learn how to do and to do before class, Put them in the right order. That's a great understanding question, by the way. Like, I'll give you a list of the steps that are needed to change a tire, and you've got to reorder them somehow. That can be done with technological tools. And watch a video, okay, and maybe comment on the performance of the actor. And then, you know, the main thrust of your class is, well, changing a tire. Like that, to me, if you're going to have a class on changing a tire, I don't want to hear a lecture about it during the class meeting. I'd like to get that done before, and then actually change tires during a class. Then I will know. Okay. I was trying to think about what kind of creative process could you involve in changing a tire? Like devise, how would you like devise a way to change a tire if the car is moving, or something kind of crazy situation. Anyway, there are so many good so many good examples here that we're not going to have time to get to. I would just say use this board as a resource for your own planning as you move forward from here. But what you have now learned how to do, I'm going to stop the share here. You can keep accessing that board at the same link as before. What you've now learned how to do and showed me how to do is that you are taking a lesson that you're thinking about teaching, or a friend is thinking about teaching. You're breaking it into concrete, clear, measurable learning objectives. And by the way, I would say that all of your learning objectives look great. Okay, know, understand, or appreciate. Concrete learning objectives. Categorize them in terms of Bloom's taxonomy. And that categorization, those categories, tell you what go in the pre-class activity and what go in the in-class activity. All you've got to do is type up a document that has students do these things. And then the class time in class is spent with students working actively on those tasks while you play the role of a coach. You observe, you communicate, you give suggestions, you keep people on track. That's your job now. And it's a very rewarding job. You still play a very important role. It's just not always lecturing. Okay. You can certainly lecture in a flipped classroom, but it's usually short and targeted. Like if people are trying to change a tire and everybody's getting it wrong, you could bring people back together and say, okay, let's stop for a second and let me kind of explain what I'm seeing here. Take 2 minutes and then get them back to work. And that's a targeted lecture with a purpose, and it really works well. Okay, so now we are beginning to bring this very short 90-minute session to a close here. So what I would like to do is get to some of your questions that you were asking. There were a lot of questions. I'm going to go back to my screen share here, although this is going to be in your Mentimeter screen as well, so you can watch in either place you wish. Okay, so here we are. You asked a lot of really great questions in the pre-session activity, and I'm not going to get to all those today, but I am going to make a video to get to as many as I can. So that'll be posted. I'll somehow get a link to you and alert you that this has been set up. I have all your emails, so maybe I'll have Alexandra or Sophia, or do it myself, let you know that I've created a debrief video. But I want to get to the questions that you have asked down here in Mentimeter. So let's take them one by one. Okay, so one person asks, should work before class be considered in the final evaluation? There are a couple of schools of thought on this. One is that the student's final evaluation should not be based on something that's simple. It should be based on higher level activities that might be located in the upper 2/3 of Bloom's taxonomy. You could do that. I personally do include pre-class work in students' final evaluations. In a typical semester for me, a typical course for me, students will be doing pre-class work about 25 to 30 times, okay, depending on the frequency of the class meetings. And the pre-class work, I will add some links to the resource page to real life examples of my pre-class work. I'm just gonna make a note to do that. The pre-class is graded pass, fail on the basis of completeness and effort. I do not require students to get all the answers right. They just have to put in meaningful responses to everything I ask them to do. So imagine your pre-session activity for today. If you answered all of the questions that were required and you turned it in on time, you get a pass, okay? In fact, I tell students that if they are gonna make mistakes, I want them to do it right away. I want to know what their misconceptions are, so then I can adjust my class planning. And so students have, students have to complete 25 out of 30. If there are 30 pre-class assignments, I require students to complete 25 of them with a pass in order to get the top evaluation. And then it kind of drops from there, 23 to get out of 30 to get the next highest evaluation, next highest grade, and so on. I think this is a good way to kind of keep students motivated to do these activities, and it's completely simple to earn a pass. And so there's really, the only way they do not earn a pass is by just simply refusing to do the work. Which gets us to one of our next questions. On the other big question, I'm just going to skip down to where it was asked. Let's see. Actually, nobody asked it here. I'll just ask it here. So people were asking, what do you do if a large group of students don't do the pre-class work? Okay. Well, I'll preface this with, let me have your faces back just for a second. So I'll preface this by saying, this rarely happens to me, okay, because I make the pre-session activity simple and mistake tolerant, and it figures into their grade in the end. I typically get between 75 to 95% of my students completing the pre-class activities. I very rarely have ever in 15 years gotten a situation where over half the class simply didn't do it because it's simple, it's easy to do, and it ties into what we do in class. Students know that I'm not going to reteach the material if they don't do it. This is really important, okay? Do not reteach material if students don't do the pre-class material, because then students will know that if I just refuse to do the pre-class, the professor will just do it for me. And suddenly the boundaries have been shifted, and you don't want that. Okay, so students know that if they don't do the pre-class work, they're going to be lost, they're going to be behind, and it's just going to be bad for everybody. That said, what you should do is to make a good explanation to students at the beginning of the semester to say, this is how we're going to order the class. Okay, you're going to be getting first contact with the simplest material before class starts just to prepare. And then we're going to be focusing this really scarce class time on the hard material rather than give it to you to struggle with outside of class. And in order to do that, you have to complete these pre-class activities or none of this works. I think communicating with students about the importance of doing the pre-class work is the way to deal with it, okay? And that often solves the problem, simply communicating with students about why you're doing things the way that you're doing. There's so much more I could say about this, but I have other questions we gotta discuss here. Let me get back to my Menti screen. A couple of you asked after that activity, should it be clear which taxonomy level a learning objective belongs to? Not necessarily. Should it? No. I mean, sometimes it is clear, like state the definition of a derivative. Okay, that's pretty clearly a remembering task. But some things are a little less certain, and that's okay. I mean, learning is not an exact science. I mean, it's more of like a craft than a science, actually, something that we work at. It's got science in it, but it's not itself something that can be exactly evaluated. So where a learning objective falls in Bloom's taxonomy is really up to you in some ways. Sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's not. Use your professional judgment to put it in the right place. What's important is whether you're putting it in the lower third, the middle third, or the top third of Bloom's taxonomy. And that's important because that tells you what goes in the pre-class activity and what goes in the in-class activity. Someone else asked that, how to teach with case studies. In many ways, the case study method goes back very, very far in the history of higher ed. And in many ways, that was one of the original forms of flipped learning. You read this case study and think about it, and then you come to class and you work with it. And to teach with case studies or in a lab course or any sort of discussion-based course or anything like that, it's the same process. You figure out what the learning objectives are. What do you want students to be able to do once this case study lesson is over with? And then, allocate them to the right places in Bloom's taxonomy, and that tells you what to do pre-class, that tells you what to do in class. There's a much stronger component of in-class work in case study methods, it seems like. And so you might find yourself being a little light on the low-level objectives and much more involved in the middle third, and that would not be surprising with a case study. Somebody asked that already. Is this tool widely used? I don't think Mentimeter is widely used at all. Nobody seems to know about it. I don't use it in my classes because there's a limit on the number of questions I can ask if you unless you pay for it. I've got another tool that I use that's similar to this for my in-class activities called Poll Everywhere, and I will leave a link to that tool in the resource page once we're done here. Mentimeter is something I use for faculty workshops like this, not so much for classes. Mentimeter also doesn't really play very well with math notation, and that's a big problem for me. Someone asked, how much time should be given to students to complete pre-class work? That's a really good question. As much time as possible. I post my pre-class activities a week in advance. And so if students have a schedule issue that's coming up, they can work ahead on it. Most students wait until, well, you know how it is. You probably did, a lot of you did the same, to be frank. I mean, you didn't start until about 24 hours before, and that's okay. So I think I try to keep the pre-class portion of the work should really take no more than the corresponding in-class lesson if it were unflipped. And by that, I mean, if I would normally teach a 50-minute class by giving 50 minutes of lecture, I'm going to try to plan out a pre-class lesson that takes 50 minutes. Okay, so it's literally just an exchange of one kind of activity for another. I'm not going to add a ton of time onto students' workloads. So in terms of how many days to give them to complete, a week is probably safe. How many minutes should be allocated to pre-class work? Probably no more than a corresponding class meeting. An hour is usually what I shoot for. And someone was asked, this is a question about a specific question about one of the activities. I'd like to end on this one here. Someone asked about flip learning with project-based learning, how to do that. So project-based learning is a specific form of teaching that is not sort of like, I think these two things can be combined. I should say I've never taught with project-based learning, so I'm just simply, I can't speak to these those sorts of things specifically. But in project-based learning, if you have an in-class meeting, okay, you have to decide what you're going to do in class. And that involves writing learning objectives. And then we get into the same workflow that I gave you in the flow chart a little earlier. You think about what the learning objectives are for the particular lesson you're going to work with that day. And you think about what those objectives are, put them in the right place in Bloom's taxonomy, and then you have some structure for allocating things to students to do before class. Now, project-based learning is a little like case studies in that it's much more involved in the in-person or group setting. And so it won't look the same as a non-project-based learning class. But I think this idea of splitting up learning objectives and having students encounter the basic ones before group meetings is the common thread here. And that applies to project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, or IBL, as it's sometimes called, or case studies, or practicum classes in the medical field. All of it can be done with flip learning, I think. Did we hit them all? Is the self-evaluation of the students essential? I think that if that's referring to that part of active learning that deals with metacognition. I don't always do that with students, but I think it's important for students to make connections between what they do and what they're learning. Having students reflect on their learning process keeps the activity from just being mindless activity. So I would say it's very important. And then finally, Peter, adding more, we got to end here. We're adding more stuff here. For each hour of class, how many hours for pre and post class? Post class activities, it's hard to tell because like if you're doing writing an essay, I mean, who knows how long that will take. But there's a standard conversion factor, at least in the United States, of if you have an hour spent in class, you should plan on 2 hours outside of class. And I take that very seriously. And so pre-class activities, post-class activities, if I meet 3 hours a week, I expect students to be working 6 hours a week outside of class through some combination of these things. I think that's fair. How to deal with theory and one last question here. Oh, this is a really important one. I think this is a good one to end on. How does it scale for large numbers of students? I think that this scales up pretty well. I think that polling activities scale up extremely well to large classes. The kind of pre-session work that I gave you, I mean, it works just as well for 400 people as it does for 42 people. It wouldn't be any more work for me if 500 people suddenly showed up and filled out the pre-class activities. Grading it, it's just on the basis of completeness and effort, and that's not very hard to do. So I think this scales up pretty well. You have to be a little picky about the activity types you use in class. Now, there are certain kinds of activities, active learning tasks that are tailor-made for large classes. And I'm going to drop the name of one of these in the chat, and I'll put it in the resource page. It's called peer instruction, invented at Harvard University for large physics classes, specifically for classes of 300 or larger. And it's a way of using polling activities and small group discussions to drive student inquiry. And it's hugely successful. And so that's how you would attack the problem of large class sizes, is pick active learning activities that were designed for large classes like peer instruction. I wish I could have the time to go into that, but I don't. Not having the time to go to all student groups end up being demotivating. I don't know. Some students like not being checked in on by the professor. They actually kind of lose motivation if I keep sticking my head in their work. I think it depends on the students. I think students like the attention, but you can't reach every student necessarily in every situation. So you have to work with what you have. Okay, folks, we are over the limit here. I just want to end with let's see, we did this already. Let me since we don't have a lot of time here, I wanted two things. First of all, this was a Menti activity, and you don't have to answer this, but I do want you to think about it. What is your next action? Like, what's a call to action would be? What are you going to do next with this information? Okay. Some of you might be thinking about your classes in the fall already. Some of you have some ideas for specific lessons. Some of you may be teaching in the summer and maybe could possibly put this to work right away. Think about this. I appreciate the answers here, not necessary, but if you think about it, converting your content to learning objectives, that's what I'm going to do next week. Is I'm going to sit down with my fall classes and I block out 2 hours and just write down every learning objective for every lesson that I intend to teach now. Okay. And so then when summer wears on and we start getting closer to September, it's going to be very easy for me to start planning lessons out. I can often get like 6 weeks ahead of time if I just have the learning objectives written out. Whatever your answer to this question is, I want you to, at some point in the next 30 minutes, sit down and think about, what am I going to do next? One thing that I want you all to think about doing next is make sure that you stay connected with each other. I want your faces back for this one here just for a second. What's very important is to not retreat into individual silos at this point, but all these 50 people who are here, these are your colleagues and these are your resources. So find a community, build a community, use that forum that Alexandra presented a little earlier, and get in there and share your work with each other, share your questions, be vulnerable with each other. The only way meaningful change happens in a university setting is for faculty to form communities where they're all committed to working on the same thing and making the same positive changes. So I highly urge you, in fact, to connect with each other and make communities. Lastly, and this is really, really the last thing, I just want to say thank you again for all of your great work today. I have, you can leave some feedback for me. I have a little form here that I often use. You can see it here. It's bit.ly/Talbert-feedback. This is just a little form that I use for myself to kind of gauge how well I hit the mark today with you. If you have a few minutes, this isn't necessary, but if you have a few minutes, I would love to hear from you about how things went today. And feel free to contact me at any time. I mean, my email's there. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm not on Twitter very much, but there it is. And my website's at rtalbert.org, and you can find a lot of articles that I've written and so forth about this and other issues. I will be updating the resource page as we go. But one resource I want to make sure you're aware of is my book. Okay, I wrote this whole book on flip learning, and it is in English, and actually it was translated into Portuguese a couple of years ago, believe it or not. So lucky you. And you can buy them both on Amazon. The Portuguese version is there. I don't speak Portuguese more than I know how to say I don't speak Portuguese in Portuguese. That's the only Portuguese phrase I know. So I appreciate any look you get. That's a one-stop resource that contains everything that I think I know about flip learning. It's all there. Okay. All right. So again, thank you so much. It's been great. I hope that you continue to work on these, and please feel free to reach out. I'll have a video coming soon with some more answers to questions. And if you need to know anything else, please reach out and ask me. It's been a fantastic 90+ minutes working with you today. I hope we get to do it again sometime. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks so much for your work.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you.